So I am saying that the that's my real point. Now, how do you find a trajectory to accept what is required today, but do not nullify what is, or what is required tomorrow, is an issue of economic prescriptions. It may require us to question some of our assumptions. And I do think that the assumptions of IMF conditionalities will have to be questioned. And to the extent that those assumptions were derived from economic theory, then economic theory will have to be questioned.
I was hoping that Mr. Duquan would have been a former governor of the central bank, would have addressed the question on dollarization. You forgot. You probably forgot. No. I mean, this has been hotly debated in the region on dollarization, and probably during your time as governor as well. The difficulty is really that we do not print the US dollar. Therefore, there's no seigniorage to be derived. In fact, we will be paying the US government for seigniorage when we dollarize. So that's the problem. And the other thing is that you need you need to pay your debt, but simply dollarizing will not help you in paying your external debt, because all you do is really say that you will use the US dollar for your domestic activities. So that never really got off the ground. It was just debated. But there is still some form of dollarization, and that is where your exchange rate continuously depreciates. You find that people tend to quote prices in US dollars. And so you're dollarized in that sense. So for example, hotels will quote their prices in US dollars as opposed to local currency. And so there's some form of dollarization that is taking place as a result. But to go to full dollarization in terms of using US dollar for transactions purposes, well, to me, it will take quite a lot more for that to actually happen. Now, the question about economic theory, the problem has been really that the economic theory tends to be dominated by the multilateral institutions like the World Bank and IMF. They choose which economic theory they will prescribe, and they follow. And so what you have really, economic theory coming from universities in the advanced industrialized countries. And it actually supplants whatever economists in the developing countries were doing. There's no attention paid to what these economists were actually saying all the years about their own economies. Instead, it is actually supplanted by economic theory coming from the advanced industrialized countries. At least that is how it's perceived. Somebody spoke yesterday about universities, this is not the exact words, but universities actually networking in the developing countries. And this is important because, you see, at the level of journals, for example, where the economic ideas are put forward and so on, this is where these ideas can actually be put in fine economic theory and developed. So I hope that day will come where you'll see that happening. With the internet technology, now more journals are going online. So therefore, you might see a more coalition of ideas coming from developing countries, from developing country journals.
The agriculture, we don't have the time. I support the notion of developing agriculture, if only as a thing for absorbing labor. But all the big countries of the world were once great agriculture, were based on agriculture. But now in the United States of America, one farmer could produce what the entire country of Trinidad and Tobago. So there's an advantage in the big countries. France is another example. So yes, whereas I support it, we have to understand that it has to be a different kind of agriculture that we're talking about, agriculture that could at least earn foreign exchange. We, after all, were based on agriculture. The ethnic composition of this country is a result of decisions based on our economic/agricultural sector. We'll have to speak about it, or we don't have the time.
Just 2 points. One, I just want to say on, we had this thing on sort of protectionism in food and agriculture, and Mr. Dukaran is absolutely right, but I want to emphasize that that was not driven by the economic and financial crisis. I mean, protectionism in agriculture has been rife, and for a long time the markets are very distorted, but it's not been the consequence of this particular crisis. That's all I was saying. On the IMF, just a few things. One is, you're right that these are pledges, but some of them, like for instance, Japan has pledged like 100 billion. That's independent of the US. The STR issuance will also, I think, come through, and that also, the role of the US Congress is likely to be much less. So you're right, A, that the total amount of money is much less than what it ought to be. B, that not all the money will materialize, but nonetheless, compared to the increase of resources of the IMF in the past, this will be a substantial increase in some resources. Conditionality, you're right, but there is a huge difference. The loans to Indonesia in the aftermath of the Asian financial crisis had more than 100 structural conditionalities. The ones now, like to Latvia and so on, have about 10 to 12. So it's an order of magnitude difference between the two.
Thank you. We've had a very interesting set of presentations, and a number of issues have been put on the table. Obviously, all four panelists and myself agree that the crisis is of phenomenal magnitude, and it's too soon to anticipate or to map the impact of this crisis, both in the developed, high middle income, and least developed countries. The United Nations, on its own account, is convening a meeting of the international financial crisis now at the end of June. The meeting, in fact, was happening the last few days, and it was postponed. And the aim of the meeting is to identify emergency and long-term responses to mitigate the impact of this crisis, particularly on vulnerable groups, and initiate a dialogue on the transformation of international financial architecture, taking into account the needs and concerns of the very diverse membership of the UN. The meeting will be 3 days long and will have 4 roundtables. The first looking at crisis on employment, the impact of the crisis on employment, trade and investment, and how it affects the attainment of the MDGs. The second, actions and appropriate measures to mitigate the impact of the crisis on development, and the 3 and 4th roundtables on the role of the United Nations and the member countries in terms of the financial and economic system and architecture, and the contributions of the UN to the debate. The presentations by Anthony Birchwood and Dr. Watson, Dr. Dukaran, and Dr. Kapoor have challenged us and provided us with insight and perspectives, whether in economic theory, in the architecture of the financial systems, the impact in Trinidad and Tobago, in the Caribbean, the shifting powers from the developed world to the group like BRICS. And I trust their perspectives will help us in our different roles and capacities to continue to reflect on this issue and to make a difference. We should not leave this crisis go to waste. I thank you, and we'll have now a break, I understand, in the program, and the meetings will continue in the afternoon on a session on the International Criminal Court and small states, and then at the end of the day with the closing ceremony. Thank you.